picture in particular is exactly what we're talking about. That, I believe that is at the
Yes,
Garden in
this
the Woods.
picture's from, Garden in the Woods, which is the Native Plant Trust's
Well, you'll notice
display garden.
there's tiarella, there's native ginger. What's that taller thing?
I think it's actually
The
doll eyes.
The doll eyes, yeah, bug bane sometimes called. But these are all shade-loving plants, shade-tolerant plants that make a great ground cover beneath a mature tree. The one on the left is just a beautiful picture of a mass of blooms and the bees. This is an allium, and the bees are just all over it. And then the other one is a place in West Hartford that we work, and that's an example, the far right is an example of, that is not all native plants. You don't have to be 100% native. You can have your peonies, you can have your azaleas. We wanna shoot for about 20 to 30%
Non-native.
non-native, a minimum of 70, a minimum of 70 to 80% native plants. So there's room in there, we're not purists, there's room in there for the plants that you really wanna grow, as long as they're not invasives. Can't
Yes,
plant
we don't
invasives.
tolerate any of the invasives.
But that's a good example of it, because there's just so much bee activity in that garden. And it's probably about 60% native. It's not.
They've done a lot with other areas in their yard incorporating
Yeah, but it's
more
gorgeous.
natives. But yeah, I mean, it just shows you that you can mesh those two styles of like your traditional ornamental garden and having an ecological habitat that is beneficial.
Okay, here, some of our favorite native plants. And when we say our, we mean ours. This is
There's
personal.
a lot more.
Yeah, there's a lot more. These are just some of the highlights. And again, the resources that we've given you in the links are really go-to. There's a number, and I noticed on Nancy's website, there's a number of plant finder. You can go to Pollinator Cat. There's just all kinds of lists all over the place. So these are ours.
We do talk about a couple of invasives that we're really trying to eliminate from most of our suburban landscapes, and I know that everybody knows this plant. You can't stop working on burning bush, but it is everywhere, and
Everywhere you don't want it.
Yes.
And if it's in your yard and you don't have the time, money, wherewithal to dig it out, and it is a bear to dig out, at least cut it down, then the berries won't mature this year. And it will come back. And then you cut it down again. But if you cut that down, at least it's too late there, the berries are already gone when it's red like that. But on the right, if you cut it down, at least the berries are gone and it won't continue the problem. It's not a solution, but it's a short-term mitigation. And some examples of our favorite alternative, blueberries. Look at the color on the right. That's every bit as beautiful as a burning bush. And even more because it's so variable. Sometimes they're orange like that. And it's a good early pollinator plant. If you can beat the birds to it, they're delicious. Good luck at that. Another good alternative is the chokeberry, Aronia arbustifolia, and there's Aronia melanocarpa, which is black beautyberry.
yes, it basically just has blackberries. Both the melanocarpa and their beautiful are edible to humans as well as birds. They might not be the most appealing taste in the world. They're very, very tart, but they're packed full of antioxidants, again, if you can get them before the birds do. They're just really, they're powerhouse plants between their spring bloom, their fall color, and the amount of fruit that they are producing in the environment.
And there is a cultivar of this. We try to stay away from some cultivars, but there's one that we like that's a very low growing cultivar that will be essentially like a 12, 14-inch ground cover when it starts to spread. And it has the berries, and it has the flowers, and it has the beautiful fall color. What's it called? Low mound
or something.
Low mound or low grow.
Yes, low grow, that sounds right. Now that, like, of course, people are really getting hyped about the natives, as they should, there have been a lot of new cultivars of these natives, and not all of them are as beneficial as the original, but that is serves the same purposes, but also is a little bit more easy to implement in a garden, especially if you're trying to keep things low and out of standing eyesight. Yeah, it's beautiful. So another invasive, unfortunately this is one that people plant a lot, it's still sold in a lot of nurseries, and it is barberry. There aren't that many plants that I hate more than barberry. If you've ever gone on a hike, you know it in the woods. If you've ever looked at a new home, you've seen it in the landscape. And it has the same problem as burning bush. It has very low nutrition berries that are bright and colorful, so birds want to eat them. They pass them along, they go through the woods, and these berries germinate, and they take over all of our native plants, basically. They create monocultures of this one specific thing. And another very unfortunate fact about barberry is that it is a host plant for ticks. So if you have, yes, if you have this on your property, if you don't hate it just because it's tiny and invasive and ugly, you can hate it because this is where all of the ticks are hanging out.
Because of the white-footed mice.
Yes, the white-footed mice love it, and something about the root, I don't remember exactly what it is about the root zone that creates a perfect overwintering habitat for ticks. So, kill the barberry. There are so many good things you can plant instead. One of those is our native sumac, and a lot of people think of sumacs as weed trees, but they're not. They're prolific, hardy native trees and shrubs. And this fragrant sumac is one of those shrubs. It's very low growing, it spreads very quickly, beautiful fall color, and songbirds absolutely adore the berries on it, which are not something we would ever see. They're very inconspicuous, but ultimately those birds are really relying on them when the time comes.
And it's good, as we have noted here, it's really good for stabilizing hillside, because it spreads pretty quickly and has a pretty dense root system, so it will hold soil from eroding. Vine bark, this is a good alternative also. Like similar conditions to the barberry, it's very, very tough in the sense, tough in the good sense, tough in the sense that it will grow in very difficult conditions. It's a pollinator favorite. There are cultivars that are red leaf. We don't like them as much as the straight species because the insects tend to like red leaf cultivars less. There's been some research on that, and the red leaves are less appealing.
The pigment's harder to digest, the anthocyanins, it's like the defense mechanism that most insects don't want to have to break down. It's too complicated.
So that's a beautiful shrub. It can be if you need to maintain it at a certain size, it responds very well to being hacked back periodically with hedge trimmers.
We love plants that are tough like that.
Love the hedge trimmer. When a lot of people don't know that miscanthus is an invasive. It's on the Connecticut invasive plant list, which is on your resource links. If you want to take a read through what's invasive in the state. It's pretty, it's overused, so that's a reason not to use it. Not only is it invasive, but it's in every Walmart and shopping plaza in Connecticut. It's just overused and big.
It's tough, and it is a fire hazard. I know that in the Northeast we don't have a lot of wildfire problems, but as we move more towards the middle of the country where this is also still an invasive plant, this is a serious contributor towards wildfires. In addition to providing very little habitat or nutrition, they are very flammable and they tend to just burn right up. So definitely a good thing to keep in mind if you're planting it very close to your house.
So there's some really good alternatives. This is one of my favorite plants. Schizophyrium, little blue stem. It's got that gorgeous, sometimes it's kind of got a bronzy cast to it, this bluish color in the fall, and then in the winter it'll hang on. I've gone hiking and seen birds. The finches will hang on to it in particular, and eat the seed heads. It's one of my favorite plants.
Yeah.
It's tough. We have it growing in a customer's garden where it's in almost full shade. It only gets about 3 hours of sun, and it's gorgeous. It does just fine, and it's under an oak tree and gets the, the slanting sun and it does just
And no
fine.
water.
No water, no water. And it's also salt tolerant, which is, if you're trying to plant near, a roadway, that's an important consideration. I don't think we mentioned that before. Or your driveway.
This is one of the few grasses that really thrives in full shade environments as well as some wetter soils. And this is our Casmantium, our northern sea oats. Really the big standout for this one is that it can tolerate almost full shade. It's relatively slow growing, but it's great at slope stabilization. And things absolutely love these little seed heads. They also make beautiful dry flowers if you're into dried arrangements. It's one of my favorite plants, actually.
One of the common names is quaking oats, because when they dry, when the wind, when there's a light breeze, it kind of is a pretty little rattling sound. Summer sweet, plant it near a window. I think Marjorie talked about this. It's a beautiful shrub. The bees, it will just be alive with bees. There's a pink form that was actually, is not a cultivar, it was found in the wild and propagated. But they're typically white. They like wet soil. You'll see them growing around ponds or in ditches.
It's a great rain garden plant.
Yes, yeah.
Because it can tolerate long periods of drought as well. So it's very, very versatile.
Bees absolutely love it.
I like that. Another one that can tolerate a lot of wet soil as well as periods of drought is our winterberry, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with because how could you not see those beautiful berries? And this is, of course, the female winterberry that has these gorgeous berries.
You need to have a male and a female pollinator, but they're pretty common in the wild. So that typically what we'll do when we're planting winterberry is we'll go over 1 year and see if it gets pollinated by a native.
And it almost
male.
always
Males
does.
always do, so you don't have to plant males, because the males don't have the three berries. I love this plant. We have this growing in our front yard, and I wish it would take over more quickly because it's so pretty. Partridge berry, and it gets those little white flowers. They're pretty inconspicuous. It's very, very low growing, very, very low growing, dense mat. And it tolerates, as it says, it's another tough plant, and it gets these beautiful berries on it. So it's just a really pretty, evergreen, also evergreen.
Very common in a lot of hiking spots around here.
That's where, yeah, that's
See
where I
it
got
along
that.
the sides of trails and things like that. So smooth airwood, viburnums. We can't say enough about viburnums. There's a bunch of them that are native to our area, and they provide a lot, both for us and for, of course, our beloved insect friends and birds. So you can see they're very profuse blooms throughout I think it's early spring that this is doing that. And then into late summer, it has these beautiful blueberries that birds go crazy for. This is another tough one that tolerates both very dry soil as well as some wetter soil. It's just, you can't go wrong with planting this. It does get pretty big, but it's also one that doesn't mind being hacked back and kept in control easily.
Maple leaf viburnum, they're all our favorites. There was this growing in woods behind our house in full shade. They don't get big in the full shade, but they berry and they feed the birds, and the flowers are there in the springtime. It does better with more sun, but it will grow, and in terrible soil.
Yeah,
It'll
this
grow.
is a very easy plant. Well, we have a lot of this in my backyard actually, which has no sun at all. No one's ever, done anything back there. I think that's part of it too, that the leaves have been allowed to build up, and we just have basically a ground cover of this maple leaf viburnum. And it is absolutely beautiful in the fall with that like reddish purple foliage. And there's a lot of bird activity on it. And this is one that you will very likely find in your own home landscapes if you have any sort of shaded woodland type area. It's fairly common, and you wouldn't notice it until until you know. But knowing what it is, it's hard not to appreciate just how special it is.
The buds are just starting to swell right now. And And this is another one that I've seen hiking. A lot of times we see these native plants advertised or on lists and you think I've never seen that in the wild. And here's one that is great under trees, it's a ground cover. It's pretty easy to find in nurseries. You wanna get the straight species, the Tiarella cordifolia, and it's got that beautiful early spike. Apple bush. Probably, the one on the left, I took that picture along River Road in, Riverton. It's all along the state forest there, and it likes the part sun, it just gets the afternoon sun. Likes wet feet, and those are the berries. Who wouldn't want that in their yard? It's beautiful.
Okay, hydrangea arborescens. So this is our native hydrangea, and it's hard to come across anyone who doesn't want hydrangeas in their yard. And it's always one of those things where we appreciate the hydrangeas are beautiful, but we're really trying to bring the focus back, of course, to native plants, but also to what's actually helpful for the environment. And this kind of, it's not as beautiful, it's not as showy as what we think of as our, yes, as our cultivar hydrangeas, but this is here, actually, I think the next slide, here it is. So this is what we're most familiar with, is that, I think that that's an Annabelle hydrangea, and they're these big cotton candy blooms. And unfortunately, what we're seeing right there, and these side petals here, those aren't the floral nectaries of the plant. Those are just bracts that are supposed to draw insects and our eyes to the plant, because the plant needs insects to be drawn to it in order to pollinate, in order to reproduce. So they don't actually serve a purpose for the insects, those bracts. They take a lot of energy and they're not used in the reproductive chain at all. What we want from our hydrangeas, and what our native hydrangea has, are these lace caps. Those areas in between those beautiful bracts that we see, those are actually the floral nectaries. That's where all of the pollen is. That's where everything that is useful to our pollinators and insects is contained. Most of these kind of cultivars are completely sterile. You may see bees on them, but they're just drawn in by the bracts. They are wasting their energy and not getting any of those resources that they really need, unfortunately. So, whenever possible, again, hydrangeas are so beautiful, they're so versatile as a part shade plant, but we really want to gravitate towards these lace caps, because then they're doing more than just being beautiful.
So the native hydrangea arborescent is harder to find in nurseries, so ask your nursery for them.
Yes, all native plants are harder to find, and by asking, by having more and more people ask and look for these plants, they're going to become more available. The demand will be there, so the supply will have to follow.
Are there some that the deer like less?
Hydrangeas or shrubs in general?
Well, I'm thinking hydrangeas.
The ones they can't find.
I don't.
Well, I think some of these are not quite big like that, but the deer could care less about them.
Interesting. It might also be like a time of year at some point, like the blooms are more succulent, the wood aspect of them is a little less tough, so they might be grazed more heavily at that point of the year. But I don't know anything about certain cultivars that are less taste than all. Yeah.
You have a deer problem.
If you have a deer problem, use your backyard for urination.
I've heard that. So that's the end of our favorites. We want to be able to answer as many questions as we can. There's three, again, we've got endless pictures of beautiful examples of native plants. Gardening for birds and caterpillars doesn't have to be not pretty. Beautiful.